In this video, the Historic Ordnance series, we're going to look at another old Soviet landmine. Now, this is the Soviet TMK-2 metallic anti-tank mine. This mine reportedly started going into development in 1955, and according to Russian sappers, Russian engineers, it was accepted into inventory, officially adopted by the Red Army in 1957. Now, this mine has been used by or is in current inventory with Russia, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Angola, Azerbaijan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iraq, Mozambique, and Namibia, to name a few. I think there's a few others that are not on the list here that I came across on another list, but I forgot to transfer over. Now, these mines were already declared obsolete before the end of the Cold War. By the time I went to basic training and AIT, we weren't even trained to recognize these mines. These were just training aids that were sitting on the shelf or hanging on the wall inside the classrooms where we had landmine warfare. But the reason I'm doing a video on this is because these are being used in Ukraine by the Ukrainian military, and supposedly the Russians are using them in Ukraine, but the only actual on-camera stuff I have or could find on the Russians using these mines in Ukraine is Russian soldiers attaching initiation systems to them and then using the handle right here to toss them into Ukrainian trenches to use essentially as satchel charges in there to try to destroy bunkers or take out large numbers of troops in the trench. Supposedly, the Russians are using them in minefields, but the only proof I found on the Russians using them in minefields was a propaganda piece that was done by the French media, where Ukrainian troops were leading the media through what they were saying were Russian minefields to point out, you know, they're using illegal anti-personnel mines, and here, see, they're using these old anti-tank mines from the 1950s, you know, they don't have enough, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if the Russians are using these in minefields. I doubt it. But there is references in the Russian sapper websites that the Ukrainians are using these in some of their minefields. How many of them? How common are they? I don't know. I have a feeling this is another one of those pieces of ordnance that were in the old Soviet emergency wartime reserves, and that's why the Ukrainians are pulling them out, tossing them in minefields. Now, some of the technicals on this. This is a shape charge. This came out long before the M21 or EFPs used in Iraq. This is designed to go off underneath the tank to breach the armor on the underside, punch into the crew compartment, and kill the crew inside. And I say crew, not engine, because of how these are supposed to be laid. Now, these things are 10 1/3 inches in diameter, and that is of the shape charge. I do not have a measurement for this bracket on the side for the tilt rod. Height of the mine, which is this part itself, is 12 inches. Once the tilt rod is attached, it extends to a little over 1 meter in height from the base to the end of the tilt rod. Weight is around 27.5 pounds, of which there's 2 explosive fillers listed. TG50, and when that is used, the weight is 14 pounds. TNT, and when that was used, it was 13 pounds. This is only tilt rod activated, not pressure. The construction of the mine itself is all metal. and it came in OD green or a yellowish brown color, and the markings on them were black, like you can kind of see in this picture here. This mine uses the TMK-2 tilt rod assembly. The Russians refer to it as the IBC-2 tilt rod assembly. Why there's a difference between NATO information and the Russian, I do not know. It also uses the MD7M detonator, which is attached to the bottom of the tilt rod assembly. And it also uses something called the DUM2 or the DUM2 detonator device, which is this right here. It's hidden inside the bracket here, but on the cutaway you can see it. It goes from the tilt rod down to the base of the shape charge. And what that is essentially a piece of det cord with a detonator on one end and some type of ignition cap up here to get it going all the way through the det cord to set off the charge and detonate the mine. Now, installation on these, little bit more complicated, but you know, remember it was designed by the Soviets for dumb peasants. Now, first thing you do, you inspect the mine, the tilt rod assembly, the MD7M detonator, which is this down in here on the cutaway. Also the DUM2 detonation device or detonating device, this piece of cordage. Everything passes inspection. At that point, while you're at the location where they're being drawn from, you're going to remove the shipping caps from just below where the tilt rod gets attached and from the side of the mine here. Unscrew those, and then you're going to screw in the DUM2 detonating device, this piece of det cord into here. Screw that into place, then put everything on the vehicle, take it to the emplacement location. These mines are only to be manually emplaced, not laid by mine layers because of their unusual shape and their size. Once you get to the location where it's going to be emplaced, you dig a hole 12 inches wide minimum and do a cutout for the bracket here on the friendly side, away from the enemy. Depth of the hole, a maximum of 13 inches deep, because they said a max of 2 to 3 inches of soil and camouflage over the top of the mine so it does not interfere with the shape charge. Once the hole is done, place the mine in the hole with the tilt rod bracket away from the enemy, so facing the friendly side. Then you're going to pack the dirt in up to near the top of the bracket here. And it did say in there to pack the dirt in. Do not just put it in there. They said use your foot to pack the dirt around the mine so that it's stable. At that point, you're going to remove the cover from the fuse well here on the bracket. You are then going to take the TMK-2 tilt rod assembly, the bottom section here. You're going to screw on the MD7M detonator to the bottom of the tilt rod assembly and then screw that into the bracket. At that point, you're going to fill dirt up into over the top of the mine. Then you are going to attach the extension onto the tilt rod. And I don't have a good picture of it here, but near the top of the assembly for the tilt rod fuse here, there's a small screw. It is a regular slotted screwdriver. You unscrew it a bit, put in the tilt rod assembly, then tighten that back up so that the tilt rod's in place, and then finish the camouflage of the mine. It's now ready to go. Now, there were notes in the instructions from the sapper websites that said it was recommended these were supposed to be placed in high grass or in shrubs. These could be used in ground that was freezing, but not a hard freeze, because the hard freeze would interfere with the shape charge getting out of the ground. There was a recommendation that if the ground was going to be frozen or it's too hard packed and that stuff and you're putting this in, you're supposed to attach this mine to a stake, a fence post, something. But it would be in the path of where the enemy armor was expected to cross over. These can be placed in snow. When that happens, they must be anchored to the ground. And it said a max of 23 inches of loose snow over the top of the mine, so as not to interfere with the jet formed by the shape charge down here. Now, removal of these mines. First off, you're going to check around it for any booby traps, any protective mines that are around it. As you come across those, neutralize them. Locate the mine. It'll be easy to find because the tilt rod will be sticking up and out of the ground. Once you locate the tilt rod, you're going to unscrew the screw here and remove the extension from the top of the tilt rod fuse. At that point is when you start clearing away the camouflage and digging down on the mine till you get to the point you can unscrew the TMK-2 tilt rod fuse assembly from the mine. Once you got that removed from the mine, you separate the MD7M detonator from the bottom of the tilt rod assembly, set that stuff to the side. You then continue with uncovering the mine. If you find any booby traps or anti-handling devices that are on the mine or next to it to prevent the engineer from removing the mine, stop what you're doing, destroy the mine in place. And it said that the charge you're supposed to use to destroy this mine is a minimum of a 2-pound charge because of the standoff here. And you would place it down here around the rim where the two halves come together to set off the explosive. Do not set it on top, set it down here around the rim. Now, once you get it uncovered, no anti-handling devices, no booby traps, you remove the mine from the hole. You leave the DUM-2 detonating device still attached to the mine. Notes from the Soviet military from back during the Cold War, do not remove it from it because, as you see in this picture here, they get a little fragile and they could break. So the Soviet military said, leave that on there. Now, something I did miss is how much does it take to set this tilt rod off? The tilt rod takes a movement of 24 to 36 degrees in any direction to activate the fuse. Reportedly, it takes between 17 to 26 pounds of pressure on that tilt rod to cause it to move and set this off. Now, what happens when the tilt rod goes off here, the fuse goes off, the force gets transferred down the det cord into a detonator down here to a booster charge, which sets off the shape charge. Now, the reason they had it where the tilt rod is supposed to face away from the enemy, it's on the friendly side, is so that when a tank comes through from this direction, it hits the tilt rod here, pushes it. This mine should be underneath the tank when it goes off. And it has a set delay of half a second from when the tilt rod gets activated before it sets off the detonator and starts the firing chain, reportedly according to Russian sappers. That way it would guarantee it is directly under the tank when it goes off. It's not just up front where maybe it'll take out some of the drivetrain. Now, there were notes that if a vehicle drives over this, say the tank tread is what moves this, or a tire on a truck, there is sufficient power in here to break the track on a tank, at least the older models from the 50s into the 60s. And there's sufficient power in here to shred that front corner of the truck or wheeled armored personnel carrier like a BTR. It won't breach the interior going off underneath the means of movement, the track or the wheels, but it is enough to stop it in place. So there you go. The Soviet TMK-2 metallic anti-tank mine. These things are grossly obsolete. Russian sappers now highly doubt that these things could even bust through the underside of a modern main battle tank. But for some reason, they are being used on the battlefield in an anti-tank role, and it looks like only the Ukrainians are using it in that. I don't know if these are being used in the front edge minefields or if these are part of a farther back minefield. I do not know. I don't have info on that part. And because these are being employed by the Ukrainians on the battlefield, it's a sure bet that a bunch of them have ended up on the international arms black market. The chances of you coming across one of these mines is pretty low, but hey, at least now you can recognize this weird thing if you do come across one somewhere. These can be disarmed. There is no built-in anti-handling device on them. There is no self-destruct built into them. Temp range for their employment is between negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit to around 122 degrees Fahrenheit. That is because of the explosives in here. Now, for all my engineer brothers and the Patriot Militia movements, always remember essay-ons.